1. The Crusades 1095–1291. The Crusades were a series of religious wars initiated, supported, and sometimes directed by the Christian Latin Church in the medieval period. The best known of these military expeditions are those to the Holy Land in the period between 1095 and 1291 that had the objective of reconquering Jerusalem and its surrounding area from Muslim rule, after the region had been conquered by the Rashidun Caliphate centuries earlier. Beginning with the First Crusade, which resulted in the conquest of Jerusalem in 1099, dozens of military campaigns were organized, providing a focal point of European history for centuries. Crusading declined rapidly after the 15th century. 2. The French Revolution, 1789 to 1799. The French Revolution was a period of political and societal change in France that began with the Estates General of 1789 and ended with the coup of 18 Brumaire in November 1799 and the formation of the French consulate. Many of its ideas are considered fundamental principles of liberal democracy, while its values and institutions remain central to modern French political discourse. Its causes are generally agreed to be a combination of social, political, and economic factors, which the Ancien regime proved unable to manage. A financial crisis and widespread social distress led in May 1789 to the convocation of the Estates General, which was converted into a National Assembly in June. The storming of the Bastille on the 14th of July led to a series of radical measures by the Assembly, among them the abolition of feudalism, state control over the Catholic Church in France, and a Declaration of Rights. 3. The Mexican-American War 1846–1848. The Mexican-American War, also known in the United States as the Mexican War, and in Mexico as the United States Intervention in Mexico, was an invasion of Mexico by the United States Army. From 1846 to 1848, it followed the 1845 American annexation of Texas, which Mexico still considered its territory because it refused to recognize the treaties of Velasco, signed by President Antonio López de Santa Anna, after he was captured by the Texian army during the 1836 Texas Revolution. The Republic of Texas was de facto an independent country, but most of its Anglo-American citizens who had moved from the United States to Texas after 1822 wanted to be annexed by the United States. 4. World War I, 1914–1918. World War I, or the First World War. The 28th of July 1914 to 11 November 1918. Also known as the Great War, was a global conflict between two coalitions, the Allies or Entente and the Central Powers. Fighting took place mainly in Europe and the Middle East, as well as in parts of Africa and the Asia-Pacific, and in Europe was characterized by trench warfare and the use of artillery, machine guns, and chemical weapons gas. World War I was one of the deadliest conflicts in history, resulting in an estimated 9 million military dead and 23 million wounded, plus up to 8 million civilian deaths, from causes including genocide, including the Armenian genocide. The movement of large numbers of people was a major factor in the Spanish flu pandemic, which killed millions. 5. World War II, 1939–1945. World War II, or the Second World War. The 1st of September 1939 to 2 September 1945. Was a global conflict between two coalitions, the Allies and the Axis powers. Nearly all the world's countries, including all the great powers, participated, with many investing all available economic, industrial, and scientific capabilities in pursuit of total war, blurring the distinction between military and civilian resources. Tanks and aircraft played major roles, with the latter enabling the strategic bombing of population centers and delivery of the only two nuclear weapons ever used in war. World War II was the deadliest conflict in history, resulting in 70 to 85 million fatalities, more than half of which were civilians. Millions died in genocides, including the Holocaust of European Jews, and by massacres, starvation, and disease. Following the Allied powers' victory, Germany, Austria, Japan, and Korea were occupied, and war crimes tribunals were conducted against German and Japanese leaders. 6. Israeli-Palestinian conflict, 1920 and ongoing. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is an ongoing military and political conflict about land and self-determination within the territory of the former Mandatory Palestine. Key aspects of the conflict include the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, the status of Jerusalem, Israeli settlements, borders, security, water rights, the permit regime, Palestinian freedom of movement, and the Palestinian right of return. 7. The Iraq-Iran War, 1980–1988. The Iran-Iraq War, also known as the First Gulf War, was an armed conflict between Iran and Iraq that lasted from September 1980 to August 1988. Active hostilities began with the Iraqi invasion of Iran and lasted for nearly 8 years, until the acceptance of United Nations Security Council Resolution 598 by both sides. Iraq's primary rationale for the attack against Iran cited the need to prevent Ruhollah Khomeini, who had spearheaded the Iranian Revolution in 1979, from exporting the new Iranian ideology to Iraq. There were also fears among the Iraqi leadership of Saddam Hussein that Iran, a theocratic state with a population predominantly composed of Shia Muslims, would exploit sectarian tensions in Iraq by rallying Iraq's Shia majority against the Ba'athist government, which was officially secular and dominated by Sunni Muslims. Iraq also wished to replace Iran as the power player in the Persian Gulf, which was not seen as an achievable objective prior to the Islamic Revolution because of Pahlavi Iran's economic and military superiority, as well as its close relationships with the United States and Israel. 8. The Korean War, 1950–1953. The Korean War, the 25th of June 1950 to the 27th of July 1953, was an armed conflict on the Korean Peninsula, fought between North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, and South Korea, Republic of Korea, ROK, and their allies. North Korea was supported by the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union, while South Korea was supported by the United Nations Command UNC, led by the United States. Fighting ended in 1953 with an armistice, with no treaty signed. 9. The Vietnam War, 1955–1975. The Vietnam War was a conflict in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia from the 1st of November 1955 to the fall of Saigon on the 30th of April 1975. It was the second of the Indochina Wars and a major conflict of the Cold War. While the war was officially fought between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, the North was supported by the Soviet Union, China, and other countries in the Eastern Bloc, while the South was supported by the US and anti-communist allies. This made it a proxy war between the US and Soviet Union. It lasted almost 20 years, with direct US military involvement ending in 1973. The conflict spilled into the Laotian and Cambodian civil wars, which ended with all three countries becoming communist in 1975. 10. The Soviet-Afghan War. The Soviet-Afghan War was a protracted armed conflict fought in the Soviet-controlled Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. From 1979 to 1989, the war was a major conflict of the Cold War, as it saw extensive fighting between Soviet Union, the DRA, and allied paramilitary groups against the Afghan Mujahideen and their allied foreign fighters. While the Mujahideen were backed by various countries and organizations, the majority of their support came from Pakistan, the United States as part of Operation Cyclone, the United Kingdom, China, Iran, and the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. The involvement of the foreign powers made the war a proxy war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Combat took place throughout the 1980s, mostly in the Afghan countryside. The war resulted in the deaths of approximately 3 million Afghans,